Have you ever considered how some conversations, perhaps even whispered across millennia, manage to reach us, albeit faintly, through the sands of time? It's a strange fact, isn't it, that we can feel a connection to people who lived thousands of years ago simply by looking at their enduring creations or piecing together the fragmented stories they left behind. It's almost as if the very air of Egypt holds residual whispers from its earliest inhabitants, telling us tales of a struggle for survival and the first stirrings of a truly remarkable civilization. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The desert, a vast indifferent expanse, wasn't always just a silent backdrop. It was, in fact, the very cradle where scattered nomadic tribes first heard the persistent, life-giving whisper of the Nile, drawing them irresistibly to its fertile banks. Imagine, if you will, the sheer pull of that ribbon of green against the endless ochre, promising not just survival, but the very possibility of a settled existence, a future beyond the daily hunt and gather. These weren't grand kingdoms yet, nor were there pharaohs with golden masks. These were small, disparate groups of people, much like us, seeking sustenance and security in a world that was both beautiful and relentlessly harsh. They were learning slowly, intuitively, how to work with the land, how to anticipate the annual inundation of the river, that miraculous flood which brought both devastation and rejuvenation in equal measure. Historians still argue whether the earliest settlements were truly permanent, or if people still maintained a semi-nomadic lifestyle, returning to the river only for certain seasons. But what is clear is that the river was their lifeblood, shaping their understanding of the world, fostering a collective memory of plenty and scarcity, and in doing so, gently nudging them towards something more. As these communities grew, expanding along the Nile, they began to develop distinct cultural identities, much like different dialects emerging from a common language. You had the people of the Nakada culture in Upper Egypt, creating exquisite pottery with distinctive red on-buff designs, a testament to their budding artistic sensibilities. Up north, in Lower Egypt, other groups were forming, perhaps a little more pragmatic, a little less ornate in their early expressions. It's fascinating, really, to think that these early stylistic choices, these subtle differences in how they decorated a pot or fashioned a tool, were the very first inklings of regional identity that would later play such a significant role in the story of Egypt. One mainstream historical fact from this period is the development of early agricultural techniques, particularly the domestication of cereals like barley and emmer wheat, which provided a stable food source and allowed for the growth of larger, more permanent settlements. This shift from pure foraging to farming, a truly revolutionary concept for its time, meant they no longer had to constantly chase their next meal, freeing up time for other pursuits, like, well, making really nice pots, and eventually building even nicer pyramids. But life wasn't just about farming and pottery. It was about understanding their world. And for these early Egyptians, that meant looking to the natural forces around them. The sun, the river, the animals. They all became imbued with a kind of spirit, a divine presence that needed to be understood, appeased, and eventually worshipped. You can almost picture them, gathered around a flickering fire at dusk, sharing stories of a great crocodile god or a powerful falcon spirit, trying to make sense of the inexplicable. It's this deep connection to nature, this nascent spiritual understanding, that would form the very bedrock of their complex religious beliefs. And frankly, who wouldn't be a little awestruck by the sheer power of the Nile? It was both provider and destroyer, much like a mischievous sibling who brings you cake but then spills it all over the floor. This intimate relationship with their environment, particularly the Nile's predictable yet awe-inspiring cycles, fundamentally shaped their worldview, fostering a sense of order and cosmic balance that would permeate every aspect of their civilization, from their art to their politics. This period, often called the pre-dynastic period, wasn't just a prelude. It was the essential formative stage where the foundational elements of Egyptian society, religion, and culture were painstakingly laid down, brick by metaphorical brick, on the fertile mud of the Nile Valley. That gentle, almost imperceptible drawing together of disparate communities, that foundational stage we just explored, began to accelerate, leading inevitably towards a more cohesive whole, culminating in what historians generally agree was the unification of the two lands. A monumental achievement often attributed to a figure named Narmer, who, perhaps more than anyone else, forged the very first truly Egyptian state. Now, perhaps is a key word here, because the exact sequence of events and even the precise identity of the unifier is one of those delightful mysteries that keeps Egyptologists up at night, clutching their copies of the Palermo stone. Did Narmer really do it all himself? Or was he just the last in a line of powerful regional rulers who chipped away at disunity until the dam finally broke? Historians still argue whether Narmer was the very first king of a united Egypt, or if his reign merely solidified a process that had been underway for generations. But one mainstream historical fact we can point to is the Narmer Ballet, a truly remarkable piece of carved siltstone which depicts a king, undeniably Narmer, wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, triumphing over his enemies. It's basically the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a victory selfie, proudly declaring, "Yep, I did that." This ballad isn't just pretty. It's a visual manifesto telling a story of conquest and consolidation, showing Narmer smiting his foes, processions of standard-bearers, and even a delightfully stylized, long-necked beast that looks like a prehistoric giraffe getting a neck massage. It's a powerful piece of propaganda designed to send a clear message. Order has been established, and the king is its divine guarantor. And this wasn't just about military might. It was also about the clever integration of existing power structures. Rather than simply crushing resistance, these early kings likely found ways to incorporate local chieftains into their new centralized administration, perhaps offering them positions of authority within the fledgling bureaucracy. Think of it like a corporate takeover, but with more maces and less paperwork. This strategic amalgamation of power, both military and political, laid the groundwork for a system that would endure for thousands of years, a testament to its surprising robustness. The establishment of a unified state wasn't just a political reshuffle. It had profound implications for every aspect of life along the Nile. With a single authority, resources could be managed more efficiently, particularly the precious waters of the annual inundation. Irrigation systems could be developed on a larger scale, ensuring more consistent agricultural yields, which, in turn, supported a growing population and, crucially, freed up labor for large-scale projects that would soon become iconic. This shift towards a more organized society also led to the development of early administrative systems, including a rudimentary form of writing, the very first hieroglyphs, which began as simple pictograms and slowly evolved into a more complex system for recording everything from royal decrees to grain harvests. Imagine being one of the first scribes, painstakingly drawing little birds and baskets to communicate, knowing that you were part of something entirely new and revolutionary. It must have felt like being on the ground floor of the internet, but with clay tablets instead of fiber optics. This period, often referred to as the early dynastic period, saw the emergence of the first true capital cities, like Thinis and later Memphis, strategically located at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt, literally the balance of the two lands. These cities weren't just administrative centers. They were burgeoning hubs of trade and culture, where ideas and goods flowed freely, contributing to a shared Egyptian identity. The pharaoh, now the supreme ruler, was not merely a king, but a divine being, a living god, the embodiment of Horus, the falcon god. This concept of divine kingship wasn't just a clever PR stunt. It was deeply ingrained in their worldview, providing a spiritual justification for the king's absolute authority and the stability of the entire cosmos. If the king was strong, Egypt was strong, and the gods were pleased. If the king faltered, chaos threatened. This fundamental belief system, established in these early days, would reverberate throughout Egyptian history, influencing everything from the construction of their tombs to the very structure of their society. The unification, therefore, wasn't just a political event. It was the birth of a civilization, complete with its unique blend of divine authority, administrative ingenuity, and a deep reverence for order. With the foundation of a unified state firmly laid, that burgeoning civilization, once merely a collection of scattered communities drawn to the Nile's embrace, began to dream on an entirely different scale, resulting in an era where truly monumental pyramids rose from the desert, reflecting not just a centralized power, but an unwavering, almost audacious belief in divine kingship. It's a shocking fact, isn't it, to think that people, thousands of years ago, with nothing but brute force, ingenious planning, and an almost unimaginable amount of dedication, could erect structures that still defy belief today. The sheer audacity of these early pharaohs, believing themselves divine enough to warrant such colossal eternal homes, truly boggles the modern mind. And while we marvel at the engineering, we must also acknowledge the thousands of lives, the sheer human effort that went into these colossal undertakings. This epoch, known as the Old Kingdom, is often called the Age of the Pyramids, and for good reason. It began with kings like Djoser, who, with his brilliant vizier Imhotep, conceived of the step pyramid at Saqqara. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a revolutionary architectural leap, a stacked mastaba that marked the first true pyramid, breaking free from the flat, rectangular burial mounds of earlier times. Imhotep, a man so ahead of his time that he was later deified, wasn't just an architect. He was a physician, a sage, a polymath whose genius sparked an era of unprecedented innovation. Historians still argue whether Imhotep's influence on Djoser was primarily architectural or extended to a broader philosophical shaping of the early Old Kingdom's worldview. But a mainstream historical fact is that the step pyramid represents the earliest large-scale stone construction in history, a testament to a society capable of organizing massive labor forces and executing complex engineering projects. Following Djoser, the pyramid builders just kept getting more ambitious. Think of Sneferu, the pharaoh who built not one, not two, but three major pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dashur. The Bent Pyramid, with its abrupt change in angle, stands as a quirky testament to a learning curve. A giant stony, oops, maybe we should have done that differently. It's almost endearing, isn't it, to see their trial and error writ so large on the landscape. But these early attempts paved the way for the ultimate masterpieces. Then came the undisputed champions, the Great Pyramids of Giza, built for Sneferu's son, Khufu, and his successors, Khafra and Menkaure. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for Khufu, is a mind-boggling achievement. Standing over 146 meters tall, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Just let that sink in for a moment. For nearly 4 millennia, nothing surpassed it. It makes your modern skyscrapers look like they're just trying to catch up, doesn't it? The construction of these pyramids required an extraordinary level of centralized control and organization. The pharaoh was not merely a ruler. He was the earthly embodiment of divine order, the Horus on earth, ensuring the cosmic balance, Ma'at, through his reign. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were cosmic machines, designed to ensure the pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife and his continued ability to intercede on behalf of Egypt with the gods. Every block, every carefully aligned passage was part of a grand theological plan. This belief system permeated society with an elaborate bureaucracy of viziers, nomarchs, local governors, scribes, and priests, ensuring the smooth functioning of the state. The entire society was geared towards supporting the pharaoh and his eternal journey, from the farmers who provided food to the skilled craftsmen who decorated the elaborate mastabas of the nobles surrounding the royal pyramids. It was a well-oiled machine, powered by faith and the promise of cosmic stability. The Old Kingdom truly represents the zenith of pharaonic power, a time when the king's authority was unquestioned and his eternal legacy was quite literally carved in stone, a silent, monumental whisper across the ages. That seemingly unshakable foundation of centralized power and divine kingship, so strikingly embodied by the colossal pyramids, eventually began to show cracks, leading to a profound shift where royal authority fractured, tragically plunging Egypt into a prolonged period of regional strife and decentralized power. It's a bit like watching a perfectly stacked Jenga tower slowly wobble, then lean, and finally, with a soft thud, collapse into a heap of individual blocks, isn't it? The sheer stability that had defined the old kingdom, that unwavering sense of purpose radiating from Memphis, slowly dissipated, replaced by a more fragmented, chaotic reality. What caused this monumental unraveling? Well, historians still argue whether the decline was primarily due to a series of unusually low Nile floods leading to widespread famine, or if it was more a political breakdown, a gradual erosion of the central government's power as regional governors gained more autonomy. Perhaps it was a potent cocktail of both, much like a bad smoothie that leaves a lingering, bitter taste. This turbulent era, spanning roughly from 2181 to 2055 BCE, is aptly named the First Intermediate Period. Imagine, if you will, a time when the once mighty pharaohs, those living gods who commanded armies of pyramid builders, found their influence shrinking to little more than their palace walls. The nomarchs. Remember those local governors who once served the king? They started acting more like independent rulers, seizing control of their nomes, provinces, raising their own armies, and even building their own elaborate tombs, sometimes even rivaling those of the earlier pharaohs in their localized grandeur. This proliferation of local power centers meant that resources that once flowed directly to the crown were now diverted, leading to a significant decrease in the central government's ability to fund large-scale projects or maintain national order. It was, in essence, a devolution of power, a kind of ancient Egyptian federalism that nobody really asked for. The unity of the two lands, once a sacred concept, became a distant memory. Instead of one unified Egypt, you had competing power blocks. The city of Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt rose to prominence, its rulers claiming the pharaonic mantle, attempting to restore order, but often struggling to extend their authority beyond their immediate vicinity. Down south in Upper Egypt, another powerful line of rulers emerged from Thebes, gradually accumulating strength and resources, setting the stage for a long and bitter struggle for supremacy. This wasn't just a polite disagreement over who got to wear the fancy crowns. There were genuine conflicts, skirmishes, and probably more than a few strongly worded letters that have sadly been lost to the sands of time. Life for the average Egyptian during this period was likely far less stable than during the Grand Old Kingdom. Trade routes might have been disrupted, and the security once guaranteed by a strong central government diminished, leaving local communities more vulnerable to banditry and internal squabbles. A mainstream historical fact from this period is the marked increase in local artistic styles, as regional workshops developed their own unique aesthetics, free from the strictures of a unified royal court. This artistic diversity, while fascinating for modern scholars, highlights the fragmentation of power. Despite the chaos, however, there's a fascinating resilience that emerges from this period. With the decline of central authority, there was a shift in religious belief and funerary practices. No longer was salvation solely tied to the pharaoh. Now, ordinary individuals, if they had the means, could aspire to an afterlife. The coffin texts, a collection of funerary spells and rituals, began to appear on the coffins of non-royal individuals, promising them access to the same eternal paradise previously reserved for kings. It's almost as if the celestial velvet robe was lowered, allowing more people into the VIP section of the afterlife. This democratization of the afterlife A surprising development amidst the turmoil reflects a deeper shift in theological understanding and a certain entrepreneurial spirit among the deceased, ensuring their personal journey to the field of reeds. While it was undoubtedly a challenging time, the first intermediate period also demonstrated the enduring spirit of the Egyptian people, their adaptability, and their innate desire to restore order from disorder, a desire that would eventually lead to a renaissance. From the crucible of disunity and the fractured authority of the first intermediate period, a new dawn began to break over Egypt, slowly but surely pulling the scattered pieces back together, bringing with it a remarkable Middle Kingdom renaissance, an era where order returned, fostering an incredible artistic flourishing, a blossoming of literary sophistication, and a renewed drive towards territorial expansion. It's almost as if Egypt collectively decided, right, enough with the squabbling, let's get back to being awesome, and then proceeded to do just that with style and intellectual rigor. The transition wasn't instantaneous, of course. It was a gradual reassertion of control, a slow, deliberate tightening of the reins by a new, powerful dynasty. Historians still argue whether the reunifying pharaohs truly managed to erase all traces of regional independence, or if a more subtle balance of power remained between the central authority and the powerful nomarchs. But what is undeniable is the profound shift in the political and cultural landscape. The reunification is largely credited to the rulers from Thebes, particularly Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty. Remember those competing power blocks we talked about, the Heracleopolitans in the north and the Thebans in the south? Mentuhotep II, after years of struggle, finally defeated his northern rivals, bringing the entire country under a single rule once more. His mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari, though later overshadowed by Hatshepsut's grander temple, was a truly innovative design, symbolizing the renewed unity and the spiritual connection between the king and the land. With reunification came stability, and with stability came prosperity, allowing for a renewed focus on culture and administration. This isn't just a mainstream historical fact, it's a foundational moment, marking the beginning of what many consider a classical age of Egyptian civilization. Unlike the Old Kingdom's emphasis on overwhelming power and monumental, unapproachable divinity, the Middle Kingdom pharaohs adopted a slightly different public persona. They were still divine, of course, but their statues often portrayed them as more human, sometimes even slightly careworn, reflecting the burdens of leadership and the struggles they had overcome to restore order. This shift in artistic representation hints at a subtle but significant change in the concept of kingship itself. A pharaoh who was not just a god, but also a shepherd of his people, responsible for their well-being. This era also saw a remarkable blossoming of Egyptian literature. Works like The Story of Sinuhe, an epic tale of an Egyptian noble's exile and triumphant return, or The Eloquent Peasant, a story of justice and rhetoric, captivated audiences then and continue to offer insights into Egyptian values now. These narratives, often complex and nuanced, demonstrate a sophistication in thought and expression that goes far beyond simple religious texts. They tell us about human ambition, perseverance, and the timeless quest for fairness. proving that Egyptians weren't just about big rocks. They had big thoughts too. Economically, the Middle Kingdom saw a renewed emphasis on resource management and infrastructure. The pharaohs invested heavily in irrigation projects, particularly in the fertile Fayum oasis, transforming vast areas into productive farmland, which boosted agricultural output and, consequently, the wealth of the state. Trade routes, disrupted during the First Intermediate Period, were re-established and expanded, connecting Egypt to the Near East and beyond. Militarily, the pharaohs embarked on campaigns to secure Egypt's borders, especially in Nubia to the south, where a series of impressive fortresses were built to protect trade routes and control valuable resources like gold and diorite. These weren't just defensive structures. They were symbols of renewed Egyptian power and a proactive approach to imperial ambitions, laying the groundwork for the future expansion of the new kingdom. So while the Old Kingdom built monumental tombs, the Middle Kingdom built impressive forts and spun tales that echoed through the ages, truly demonstrating a blend of practicality and profound cultural depth. Just as Egypt had settled into the comforting rhythms of its Middle Kingdom renaissance, extending its influence and enjoying a period of relative peace and prosperity, the winds of change once again began to blow from beyond its borders, leading to a profound period of instability where foreign Hyksos rulers emerged in the delta, fundamentally challenging the native pharaoh's dominion. It's a bit like having a lovely, quiet dinner party, only for unexpected guests to show up completely uninvited and then proceed to make themselves disturbingly at home in your living room, isn't it? The Egyptians, who had grown accustomed to being the dominant power in their region, found themselves grappling with an entirely new kind of challenge, an influx of foreigners who brought with them not just new ideas, but also new technologies and a distinct military advantage. This challenging era, known as the Second Intermediate Period, stretched from roughly 1650 to 1550 BCE. The Hyksos, a name that translates roughly to rulers of foreign lands, were a diverse group of people, primarily of Semitic origin, who had been gradually migrating into the eastern Nile delta for decades. Initially, they might have settled peacefully, perhaps as traders or craftsmen. But as the central authority of the Middle Kingdom weakened, another one of those slow, creeping declines, possibly due to a succession of less effective pharaohs or a series of local squabbles that grew out of hand, their numbers and influence grew. Historians still argue whether the Hyksos conquest was a sudden, violent invasion or a more gradual infiltration and assumption of power, a kind of slow-motion takeover that only became apparent when it was too late. But a mainstream historical fact is that the Hyksos established their own capital at Avaris in the eastern delta, from which they controlled much of Lower Egypt, even collecting tribute from some native Egyptian rulers to the south. What made the Hyksos particularly formidable was their introduction of advanced military technology, notably the horse-drawn chariot and the composite bow. Imagine the shock for the native Egyptians, accustomed to their traditional infantry and simpler bows, suddenly facing highly mobile, archer-equipped chariots thundering across the battlefield. It was a game-changer, akin to going from swords to machine guns, and it gave the Hyksos a decisive edge. They weren't just military innovators. They also brought new cultural elements, integrating some Egyptian customs into their own, but largely maintaining their distinct identity. They adopted Egyptian titles, worshipped some Egyptian deities alongside their own, and even commissioned monuments in the Egyptian style. This cultural blending, however, didn't erase the underlying tension between the foreign rulers and the native Egyptian principalities that still held sway in Upper Egypt, particularly the emerging power center at Thebes. While the Hyksos controlled the north, the native Egyptian pharaohs of the 17th dynasty maintained their base in Thebes, albeit as vassals to the Hyksos for a time. This period was one of simmering resentment and a determined effort by the Theban rulers to regroup and eventually expel the foreign occupiers. It was a prolonged Cold War, punctuated by occasional hot skirmishes, as the Thebans slowly built up their military capabilities, learning from their adversaries. Imagine the whispered conversations in Theban palaces, the clandestine training, the growing desire to reclaim what they felt was rightfully theirs. This period of foreign domination, though humiliating for the Egyptians, inadvertently provided the catalyst for a surge of nationalist sentiment and a profound military revolution. The ultimate clash would not only expel the Hyksos, but also fundamentally transform Egypt's understanding of its place in the world, leading to a more aggressive, imperialistic mindset. The struggle against the Hyksos wasn't just a fight for territory. It was a fight for the very soul of Egypt, a defining moment that would shape its future for centuries to come. That period of foreign humiliation and the subsequent struggle for liberation, born from the encroachment of the Hyksos, didn't just end with their expulsion. It forged a new, more outward-looking and decisively assertive Egypt, leading directly to an era where Egypt's reach extended far beyond its traditional borders, creating a vast empire through unprecedented military might and shrewd diplomatic prowess. It was as if, after being kicked out of their own living room, they decided to buy the whole neighborhood and then some, just to make sure it never happened again, transforming themselves from a defensively minded state into a truly formidable superpower. This wasn't merely a restoration of former glory. It was an exponential leap forward, a shift in national identity that would define centuries. This incredible expansion marked the beginning of the New Kingdom, often considered the Golden Age of ancient Egypt, spanning from approximately 1550 to 1070 BCE. The pharaohs of the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, forged in the crucible of resistance against the Hyksos, realized that simply defending their borders wasn't enough. The best defense, they concluded, was a good offense, or more accurately, a vast buffer zone of controlled territories and vassal states. The initial push came from the victorious Theban rulers. Ramesses the pharaoh who finally drove out the Hyksos, pursued them relentlessly into Canaan, effectively ending their threat for good and signaling Egypt's new, proactive stance. He reunited the two lands once more, but this time the unity came with an imperial ambition that dwarfed all previous attempts. A mainstream historical fact from this period is the dramatic increase in the size and organization of the Egyptian army, transforming it into a professional fighting force, complete with specialized units, advanced logistics, and crucially, the very horse-drawn chariots they had learned to master from the Hyksos. Who knew that getting conquered could be such a great training exercise? The pharaohs who followed Ahmose built upon this foundation with remarkable vigor. Think of Thutmose, who led campaigns deep into Nubia, securing its gold mines and establishing Egypt's southern frontier. Then came Thutmose III, often dubbed the Napoleon of Egypt, a military genius who launched 17 successful campaigns into the Near East. He conquered vast swathes of territory, from modern-day Syria to Palestine, consolidating an empire that stretched further than any previous Egyptian dominion. His victories were meticulously recorded on the walls of temples, detailing every city captured, every tribute levied, painting a vivid picture of a relentless military machine. Historians still argue whether Thutmose III's relentless campaigning was primarily driven by economic motives, seeking control over trade routes and resources, or by a more profound ideological commitment to securing Egypt's dominance and divine favor. But his impact on the geopolitical landscape was undeniable. This imperial expansion brought immense wealth into Egypt. Conquered territories paid tribute in gold, silver, timber, exotic animals, and a constant stream of luxury goods. This influx of resources fueled monumental construction projects on an unparalleled scale, particularly in Thebes, which became the religious and political heart of the empire. Grand temples like Karnak and Luxor were expanded and adorned, their colossal columns and intricate carvings proclaiming the glory of the pharaohs and the might of Amun-Ra, the chief deity of the new kingdom. The Valley of the Kings became the new necropolis, with pharaohs opting for hidden, elaborate tombs carved deep into the rock face rather than towering pyramids. A strategic shift to protect their eternal resting places from tomb robbers. A surprisingly persistent problem, it seems. This era also saw the rise of a powerful priestly class, particularly those dedicated to Amun, who grew immensely wealthy and influential from the offerings and endowments pouring into the temple complexes. The new kingdom wasn't just about military conquest. It was about projecting power, accumulating wealth, and showcasing an unrivaled cultural and religious magnificence that truly astonished the ancient world, cementing Egypt's status as the preeminent civilization of its time. Within that magnificent tapestry of the new kingdom, where pharaohs were busy extending their empire and accumulating unimaginable wealth, there emerged a figure so extraordinary, so utterly defiant of tradition, that her story continues to fascinate and confound us. For Hatshepsut, a powerful female pharaoh, quite simply defied every expectation, ruling with unparalleled skill and presiding over a period of astonishing prosperity. It's truly a shocking fact, isn't it? To think that in a society so deeply patriarchal, a woman could not only ascend to the highest office, but could do so by adopting all the traditional male iconography of kingship, right down to the false beard. She wasn't just a queen, she was the king, a masterclass in ancient rebranding and self-assertion. Hatshepsut's rise to power, however, wasn't a straightforward coronation. It was a testament to her shrewdness and political acumen. Originally acting as regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, yes, the Napoleon of Egypt we just spoke about, Imagine having her as your stepmom. She gradually transitioned from regent to co-ruler and eventually to full pharaoh, adopting all the royal titles and regalia. Historians still argue whether her assumption of full pharaonic power was a power grab driven by ambition or a necessary step to ensure stability and effective governance during her stepson's minority. But a mainstream historical fact is that she commissioned numerous inscriptions and statues depicting herself with a masculine physique, wearing the traditional pharaonic kilt and the false beard, clearly asserting her right to rule as king, not just as queen. She was, in essence, putting on a powerful performance, blurring gender lines to ensure cosmic order. Her reign, lasting around 22 years, circa 1479 to 1458 BCE, was a period of remarkable peace and economic success, a stark contrast to the relentless military campaigns that often characterized the new kingdom. Instead of conquering new lands, Hatshepsut focused on internal development, trade, and monumental building projects that rivaled those of her male predecessors. Her most famous achievement, perhaps, is her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a stunning terraced structure nestled against the cliffs of western Thebes. It's a masterpiece of ancient architecture, designed to blend seamlessly with the natural landscape and filled with reliefs celebrating her divine birth, her accomplishments, and her famous trading expedition. It's almost as if she wanted to build something so spectacularly beautiful that nobody could ever forget her. And frankly, she succeeded. And speaking of that famous expedition, Hatshepsut revitalized long-distance trade, most notably launching a massive voyage to the mysterious land of Punt, located somewhere on the Horn of Africa. The reliefs at Deir el-Bahari vividly depict the journey and the exotic goods brought back. Myrrh trees, frankincense, gold, ivory, animal skins, and even live baboons. This wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about demonstrating Egypt's prestige and securing valuable resources that fueled its economy and religious rituals. Imagine the sheer logistics of such a voyage in ancient times, a testament to Egypt's administrative and naval capabilities under her leadership. Her focus on trade and internal prosperity, rather than constant warfare, allowed the kingdom to flourish, providing stability and abundant resources that would later be inherited by Thutmose III, allowing him to launch his own grand campaigns. While her legacy was later targeted for erasure by her successors, a rather childish attempt to pretend she never existed, if you ask me. The sheer quality and scale of her monuments ensured that her achievements and her undeniable status as a truly powerful and successful pharaoh could never be fully forgotten. She truly was a force of nature, breaking the mold and leaving an indelible mark on Egyptian history. Just when the new kingdom seemed to have settled into a comfortable rhythm of imperial expansion and grand building projects, and after the extraordinary reign of a female pharaoh had perhaps subtly shaken up traditional notions of kingship, there arose a figure so utterly revolutionary, so shockingly disruptive to the very spiritual bedrock of Egypt, that Akhenaten, a truly radical pharaoh, openly challenged ancient gods, briefly introducing a bewildering near monotheistic cult. It's a mystery, isn't it? To think about what compels a ruler to completely upend thousands of years of deeply ingrained religious practice, essentially telling everyone, nope, you've all been worshipping wrong this whole time, and I'm here to fix it. It was an act of audacious religious reform that sent shockwaves through a society built upon a complex pantheon. This dramatic shift began with Amenhotep IV, who, early in his reign, started to focus almost exclusively on a single deity, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. Unlike the traditional gods, who had complex mythologies and anthropomorphic forms, the Aten was depicted simply as a sun disk, with rays ending in hands, offering life. It was a stark, almost abstract form of worship. Then, around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV took the unprecedented step of changing his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, and began systematically dismantling the worship of Amun-Ra, the powerful state god of Thebes. He closed temples dedicated to Amun, defaced his images, and even erased the god's name from monuments. Imagine the shock and horror among the powerful priests of Amun, who had grown immensely wealthy and influential over centuries. It was like the CEO of a major corporation suddenly deciding the company was going minimalist and firing everyone. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's religious revolution was a genuine spiritual awakening or a shrewd political move to curb the immense power of the Amun priesthood, which had become a significant rival to royal authority. But a mainstream historical fact is the construction of a brand new capital city, Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, meaning horizon of the Aten, literally built from scratch in the middle of the desert, where the pharaoh and his court could exclusively worship the Aten, far from the influence of the old gods. Akhenaten's reign, circa 1353–1336 BCE, was a period of intense artistic and cultural upheaval, known as the Amarna period. Art from this time is strikingly different from traditional Egyptian conventions. Figures are depicted with elongated heads, slender limbs, and softer, more naturalistic expressions, often showing scenes of royal domesticity with Akhenaten, his great royal wife Nefertiti, and their daughters basking in the Aten's rays. It's almost startlingly intimate compared to the rigid, idealized portrayals of earlier pharaohs. This wasn't just a style choice. It was a deliberate break from the past, designed to reflect the new religious dogma and its emphasis on naturalism. Nefertiti, too, was a powerful figure in her own right, often depicted on equal footing with Akhenaten, participating in religious rituals and wielding significant influence. Her famous bust, found in the ruins of Amarna, is perhaps one of the most iconic and beautiful pieces of ancient Egyptian art. Her serene gaze seemingly holding millennia of secrets. However, Akhenaten's revolution was short-lived and ultimately unsustainable. The abrupt imposition of a single deity, the suppression of ancient traditions, and the abandonment of the old capital alienated the powerful priesthoods, the military, and the general populace who clung to their beloved gods. While Akhenaten focused on his religious reforms, Egypt's foreign policy seems to have suffered, with diplomatic correspondence from the Amarna letters revealing increasingly urgent pleas from vassal states for Egyptian aid against encroaching enemies, often ignored by the pharaoh. His successors, particularly the young Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, quickly reversed his policies, abandoned Amarna, and restored the worship of Amun and the old gods. attempting to erase Akhenaten's memory from history. The heretic pharaoh, as he came to be known, was a fascinating outlier, a truly radical thinker whose grand experiment, while ultimately failing, left an indelible and still debated mark on the incredible story of ancient Egypt. That brief, bewildering detour into religious revolution, ushered in by Akhenaten and his singular devotion to the Aten, was swiftly and decisively reversed, leading to a period of restoration where traditional beliefs were reinstated, eventually culminating in the incredible discovery of the boy king's untouched tomb, Tutankhamun's final resting place, which later revealed an unparalleled glimpse into the lavish and intricate world of royal burial practices. It's a truly shocking fact, isn't it, to consider that while countless other pharaohs' tombs were plundered over millennia, this one, belonging to a relatively minor king, remained almost perfectly preserved, waiting for its accidental rediscovery. It's as if fate itself had decided to keep one secret intact, just for us. Tutankhamun, originally named Tutankhaten, remember the Aten part, ascended to the throne as a child, around the age of 9, following the tumultuous reign of Akhenaten. Under the guidance of powerful advisors like the Vizier I and the General Horemheb, the young king's reign became synonymous with the restoration of the old order. The Aten cult was dismantled. The temples of Amun were reopened and lavishly endowed, and the capital was moved back to Thebes. Tutankhamun himself changed his name to reflect his devotion to Amun, signifying a complete return to orthodoxy. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun himself played an active role in these decisions, given his youth, or if he was largely a figurehead for the powerful conservative forces eager to undo Akhenaten's reforms. But a mainstream historical fact is that his reign marked the official end of the Amarna period and the re-establishment of traditional Egyptian religion as the state cult. Tutankhamun's life, however, was tragically short. He died mysteriously at around 19 years old. His early death meant his tomb was prepared rather hastily, perhaps even adapted from a non-royal tomb, which, ironically, contributed to its survival. Unlike the grand, conspicuous tombs carved into the Valley of the Kings that often attracted the attention of ancient tomb robbers, Tutankhamun's resting place was relatively small and eventually hidden by the debris from later constructions. And there it lay, undisturbed, for over 3,000 years, a sleeping treasure trove waiting for its moment in the sun. It's almost as if the universe decided to save the best for last, preserving a perfect snapshot of a pharaoh's burial for modern eyes. Then came 1922, and the culmination of years of tireless searching by British archaeologist Howard Carter and his patron, Lord Carnarvon. Remember that feeling of anticipation, that slow, deliberate unveiling of something ancient and mysterious? Imagine the heart-stopping moment when Carter, peering through a small hole into the tomb's antechamber, was asked by Carnarvon, "Can you see anything?" and famously replied, "Yes, wonderful things." And wonderful things there were. The tomb contained thousands of artifacts, from gilded shrines and chariots to everyday objects, food, clothing, and most famously, the solid gold burial mask that has become the iconic face of ancient Egypt. The sheer quantity and exquisite craftsmanship of these objects provided an unparalleled insight into the wealth, artistry, and religious beliefs of the New Kingdom court. It wasn't just a tomb, it was a time capsule, a complete toolkit for the afterlife, from board games to sandals, ensuring the king would lack nothing in his eternal journey. The discovery sparked a global sensation, reigniting popular interest in ancient Egypt and revolutionizing our understanding of pharaonic burial practices. It showed us not just a grandeur, but the intimate details of a king's preparations for eternity and the belief system that dictated every elaborate step. Tutankhamun's mummy, too, was incredibly preserved, allowing modern scientists to study his health and even speculate on the cause of his death, adding another layer to his enduring mystery. While his reign was short and largely overshadowed by his predecessors and successors in terms of political impact, the sheer fortune of his tomb's preservation cemented Tutankhamun's place as perhaps the most famous pharaoh in history, proving that sometimes even a minor player can leave the biggest impression. The brief, albeit fascinating, interlude of Akhenaten's religious rebellion and Tutankhamun's swift restoration of the old gods set the stage for an era of renewed imperial might and colossal self-aggrandizement, personified by a pharaoh so impactful, so utterly obsessed with leaving his mark, that Ramesses II, often simply known as the Great, became the defining monarch of his age, building monumental temples and leaving an indelible, truly enormous mark on Egypt's landscape. It's a shocking fact, isn't it, that one man could so thoroughly dominate the architectural and historical narrative of an entire civilization, filling it with his own likeness, his own triumphs, and his own sheer, unadulterated ego. He was, in essence, the ultimate brand ambassador for himself. Ramesses the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, ruled for an astonishing 66 years, circa 1279-1213 BCE, one of the longest reigns in Egyptian history. This longevity alone allowed him to undertake a building program of unparalleled scale and ambition. He was not just a builder, he was a warrior, a diplomat, and a prolific self-promoter who understood the power of propaganda centuries before the term existed. Historians still argue whether his military victories were always as decisive as his monumental inscriptions claim, or if some were exaggerated for political effect. But a mainstream historical fact is his pivotal role in the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, a fierce clash that, while ending in a stalemate, was proclaimed by Ramesses as a glorious Egyptian victory on countless temple walls. He then surprisingly negotiated the first recorded international peace treaty with the Hittites, showcasing his diplomatic prowess alongside his military might. It's almost as if he decided, why fight when you can sign a really fancy scroll and then still claim you won? But it is Ramesses's building frenzy that truly sets him apart. He adorned Egypt with more monuments than almost any other pharaoh. Think of the colossal rock-cut temples at Abu Simbel in Nubia, with their 4 massive seated statues of Ramesses himself, gazing imperiously across the Nile. These temples were not only architectural marvels, but also powerful statements of Egyptian dominance and a clever bit of psychological warfare aimed at the Nubians. Then there's the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple at Thebes, once home to a colossal fallen statue of the king that inspired Percy Bysshe Shelley's famous poem, Ozymandias. And let's not forget his massive additions to the already sprawling Karnak temple complex, particularly the immense hypostyle hall, a forest of 134 towering columns that still overwhelms visitors today. Standing amidst those colossal columns, you can almost hear the whispered boasts of the pharaoh echoing off the stone. Ramesses the Great also moved the capital to a new city he built in the delta, by Ramesses, House of Ramesses, a strategically important location that facilitated his campaigns in the Near East and served as a major naval base. This city, now lost, was described as a magnificent metropolis, a testament to his ambition and organizational skill. Beyond grand temples and cities, Ramesses also expanded and restored numerous smaller temples and monuments across Egypt, often usurping or simply adding his name to the works of earlier pharaohs. He was, in essence, putting his stamp on everything he could get his royal hands on. He left behind a legacy of sheer scale, a physical manifestation of an empire at its peak, and a testament to a ruler who was acutely aware of his place in history and determined to ensure his eternal renown. His rule was a period of sustained power and influence, demonstrating the enduring strength and wealth of the new kingdom. He was, in short, the undisputed heavyweight champion of pharaohs, and he made sure everyone knew it in granite and sandstone. That monumental era of Ramesside power, a zenith of imperial grandeur and self-aggrandizement, could not, however, last forever. And as the sands of time continued their relentless shift, Egypt found itself entering a challenging new phase where successive foreign powers increasingly vied for control, slowly but inexorably chipping away at Egypt's once mighty independence. It's a bit like watching a magnificent ancient tree, once unshakable, slowly succumb to the persistent gnawing of countless tiny insects.